We are on the frontiers of a new science. We're all starting to awaken to truths about who we are and where we're going. Open yourself to new knowledge about the power of spiritual energy and consciousness. Journey with Donna Smith-Moncrieffe as she takes you through the world of mediumship, energy healing, out-of-body experiences, past life regression, and all topics that demonstrate evidence of the true nature of our reality.
Welcome to On the Frontiers of a New Science. I am the host, Donna Smith-Moncrieffe, and on today's show we have August Goforth, a licensed psychotherapist in private practice in New York City. He is known in physical mediumistic communities for his writing, scholarly interest, and investigative participation as an intuitive and physical medium. He is the co-author of The Risen, Dialogues of Love, Grief, and Survival Beyond Death, 21st Century Reports from the Afterlife Through Contemplative, Intuitive, and Physical Mediumship. August is a frequent participant in physical mediumship seances, and I was very privileged to meet him in person as we journeyed in a dark seance room together September 2014 in New Jersey. Welcome, August.
Hi there. Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I was just thinking it certainly was a dark seance room, wasn't it?
It was. It absolutely was, but it was absolutely fabulous. And why don't, for our listeners, a number of people, unfortunately, are still not, they still don't know about physical mediumship since the early days of spiritualism in the 19th century. Some people thought it went away. Can you tell us a little bit about just what it is?
Broadly speaking, mediumship, as I see it itself, can be divided into two areas. First, for want of a better word, there's what's called mental mediumship, which includes what I understand as intuitive and inspirational mediumship. And secondly, there's physical mediumship. So the two can be set apart, but what's interesting is while mental mediumship can be set apart from physical mediumship actually embraces both areas. So there's actually mental mediumship going on during a physical mediumship sitting. But lately, I've actually been reconsidering this, if this is totally true, because of the emerging studies on neuroplasticity that come across my desk as a therapist.
Right.
Neuroplasticity is that biological process that appears to enable new brain cell growth directly due to thinking, which results in fixed learning. So if a mental medium is achieving brain cell growth as a direct result of thinking that arises from spirit contact, then could we say that there's some kind of physical mediumship component happening there? But for now, I'll stick with saying that physical mediumship involves ordered movement of matter that we can sense in some way, also the manifestation of sounds and voices, the creation of what I'm calling ectoplasmic structures, and the materialization sometimes of spirit people in physical form. Other examples would be air temperature changes and breezes that go on in the room when the lights go out, also something called apports, which are earthly material things dematerialized from somewhere outside the seance space and rematerialized usually in or near it. These activities are performed usually through the operation of certain forces governed by certain laws, which we may or may not be aware of or can yet conceptualize. So I prefer not to label these kinds of activities as abnormal, but they could be called supernormal because we on Earth don't yet possess normal working knowledge of the ways and means of that performance.
Right. So, August, with that kind of a description of physical mediumship, let's step back a bit in terms of, tell us a little bit about an example of a physical medium that you've experienced.
Most recently with a medium from Germany, and he displays quite a few different phenomenon when he's in very, very deep trance, meaning he's dissociated from his body. And of course, the room is always darkened because ectoplasm and physical materializations can't withstand the crude effects of direct white light or sunlight, but sometimes we can see them under certain kinds of infrared or even red light. And so I've seen ectoplasm with this medium under red light conditions. And I've also experienced physical manifestation in darkened rooms with another group in France where there was no red light allowed, but instead physical objects like chairs and tables and ping pong balls had glow tape on them or glow paint on them, and you could see them levitating and moving all around the room, way over our heads, sometimes coming over and sitting on your lap or tapping you on the head in the pitch blackness. So those are some of the more dramatic kinds of things I've seen so far.
Right, and I can recall, I just love to share with my listeners, is that one of the first seances that I attended with you, with Kai Mugi in New Jersey, was simply terrifying for me at one point because I had worn three-quarter pants, and we had been warned that there would be some types of touches, but I didn't expect furry creatures to have materialized in the room. And for the listeners, what's important to understand is these rooms are sealed prior to the seance. The sitters are all checked. So if you're feeling a furry, bushy tail on your leg, that means that this dog or entity has materialized in the room. And so with that, August, a little bit more maybe for our listeners about ectoplasm. You talked about ectoplasm, and I think this is a very important ingredient that that contributes to the materialization. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Right, sure. Probably a lot of people are sort of familiar with it from maybe the movie Ghostbusters, or they talk about ectoplasm and it's that green goo and everything.
Yes, the slimy something, yes.
Right, yeah. But it's not really that. It's with certain physical mediums, it appears that there's a certain substance that's produced either from or near their body. Sometimes it comes right out of their body. And the substance could be described as the raw material of physical materializations, which includes independent voice, telekinetic action like levitation and movement of objects and even people. There have been other terms. Sometimes people may come across like teleplasm or idioplasm and so on, but ectoplasm seems to be the one most people use. Typically, the medium is in a full state of trance for ectoplasmic activity to happen, but not always. And it seems to actually emerge from various openings or areas of the medium's body as an invisible or sometimes visible gas, kind of like steam.
Yes.
And then it becomes, or it can become more solid and sort of look like cotton candy or clouds, and it can continue to become more and more solid and start assuming rather vague and unshaped forms at first, or even specific forms like hands coming out of it, or parts of a spirit person's body or face, or sometimes even the entire body. It can manifest into a kind of device that allows people in spirit to speak through so we can hear them. It's often called an ectoplasmic voice box.
Right.
But it's not really a duplicate of the human vocal organs. It's something quite uniquely different. But even in a vague shape, ectoplasm can move about really slowly or very quickly, pick up or push objects. I've found in some of the older text of books I have from spirit people who are speaking through mediums who refer to having it as different grades from coarse to finer, each one used for different purposes by the spirit team. When it's materialized, it appears to be highly plastic and pliable. It can take on the visible form of human bodies and parts, objects, yes, animals. It seems elastic almost beyond limitation, yet it can manifest as something stronger than steel. It's highly sensitive and kind of unpredictable. And apparently it occurs naturally in varying amounts in all of us, but to the greater extent, certain mediums. It can look quite different in appearance when in more solid form. I've seen it sometimes very bright white and sparkly like diamonds all over it, and sometimes it's darker or grayish and kind of sluggish looking. It can look like a kind of rough cheap cloth or even very fine silk fabric. Yes. It can look very rubbery. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Now, August, I recall for me it was great to see as you talked about, it can become very hard in the structure. And you will recall the seance that we were at together, a hand emerged. And one of the things that was very important for listeners to know is that the medium, this was all in red light. We could clearly see that the medium was being held, and also the medium's partner was being held. So there were no confederates, nobody contributing to any trickery. This ectoplasm was moving, and a hand-like structure came out and up and threw out the crystal apport. Now, that was very interesting for me. Can you describe an example of an ectoplasmic structure that struck you? It was outstanding. And can you tell us what you think the purpose of that is?
Well, exactly what the purpose is still anyone's educated guess.
Okay.
The most outstanding one I've seen was at one of Kai's sittings near Lilydale, which is the historical village of mediums up in upstate New York. And I sat several times for a week with him, and just as you said, we all sat in a circle, everyone held hands, and there's very strict controls. Like, people are not allowed to release their hands at any time. So, like, when you felt the furry animal brushing against you, you were holding my hand, you were holding someone else's hand.
Yes,
Kai's hands are being held, and we can see that. So all this stuff is appearing, not with anyone else touching it. What I saw was, so in his case, the ectoplasm was coming out of his mouth, and he actually had to bend over. Now, he's being controlled completely by a spirit control who takes over his body. So Kai is not really aware of what's going on. He's completely out. And this ectoplasm, the spirit was using Kai's hands to just pull volumes and volumes of this, like, white light, sparkly, silky substance out of his mouth. And at first it looked like spider web. And as it fell to the floor, it was just like yards and yards of material just falling to the floor. And then it suddenly changed structure into more of a cloud, and then it started rising up and swirling around and around and around. And it looked just like a miniature tornado in slow motion moving around. It was maybe 4 or 5 feet high, all this in red light. And then dark spots started forming in it as it was turning around, and every time it turned around, one of the dark spots actually became a face. And very quickly, there were about, I counted, maybe 19 or 20 or more different faces, very little, like, miniature cameos appearing in it. And one of them, suddenly it stopped, and one of these faces started growing and got bigger and bigger and bigger until there was a human face forming right out of the ectoplasm, pushing out of it. And you could see the eyes starting to open and the eyebrows going up and down and the mouth moving. And the spirit, speaking through Kai, said, can someone identify who this person is, because they mean something to someone who's in the room.
Right.
And both I and my friend recognized it as his grandmother, who had just passed away a couple of years before that at the age of 102. And it was interesting because it also, that was the anniversary of his father's death, which had been a year before. So it was rather an outstanding materialization for both of us.
Now, I find that fascinating. And what is really amazing about this, August, is you are now giving me the background to the picture, because this was photographed. This was the one that was photographed in your paper.
Right, yes. Shannon Taggart was there, and this was the first time that anyone had ever been allowed to photograph what was going on.
Now, I think that's amazing. Two things I think that's amazing is, first of all, that Spirit allowed us, or humanity, to photograph that. And so if we could just park that thought for a second and get back to it. But let's get back to the faces forming. As I said, I saw the picture. I saw definitely the big face, but I did not know that somebody was actually able to verify who that was in the seance room.
Right, yes. Both nights that happened, because it was apparently very rare. I haven't seen it since with him. But the next night it happened again, and another person who actually is a medium at Lilydale identified it as her uncle. And that's the one I think that's in my study. I have a picture of her Uncle John is his face that's appearing out of. out of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so would that not be, in your opinion, evidence of survival, of consciousness, the life continuity?
Well, no, because how do I know that, again, I mean, just, devil's advocate, how do I know that that's not being formed out of pictures from my mind or picture from the relative's mind that spirit can pull out and then reproduce in some kind of a way? Obviously, their ways and means and technology are far beyond our ability to conceptualize much of it. Unless the person somehow, like, say that face had a voice and could talk to me and say, "Hi, August," and then give me a piece of substantial information that I would know who it is.
Okay, that's an important point then. Okay, so in this particular case, it was the visual, which is one piece, but you're saying these particular materializations did not speak.
Correct.
Okay, well that's very important. Okay, so you're saying though, if you would see a visualization plus it spoke and provided identifying information, perhaps that could be considered evidence that we don't die in the physical mediumship seance.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's very good. So let's get back to that other point, because I think that's a very important that our listeners understand that, as I said, August mentioned before that the ectoplasm is sensitive to light. And so taking photographs are very rare and capturing this on film. And in this particular case, some of this that August just described was captured on film. Do we have any information? Was it that the environment was in a state that allowed for that particular photography, or what do we know why Spirit allowed that night?
We don't know. A lot of my experience has been so far that the people in Spirit are very reluctant to share very much about what they're doing and how they're doing it and why it's happening and even what their agenda is. And sometimes it comes across as they're just being mean and withholding it to us. Right. But what I really understand is that they have tried and fail over and over again to try to explain to us just what is going on and the conditions and the chemistry and the sciences that are going on are so far beyond us that it would be like us trying to explain how television works to a Neanderthal. We just wouldn't have the language for it. So they often just ask us, they give us just guidelines to sit and be open and be still and be accepting and be wondrous and be curious and don't be afraid. So to try to figure out, what can we do to make it better and make it easier, I don't know if there's ever been any answers. Usually the spirit team will say, we're going to count to 3 and then you can take a picture, but take it fast. And they're doing something on their side to try to stabilize the ectoplasmic form because it will deteriorate rather quickly, even under red light.
Right.
Pretty
now,
fast.
And if August, if you have, we can talk before the show ends about apports, because I think that's another area that you've probably experienced, and I know we saw 2 apports that same night with Kai. Could you, I don't know if you want to go over one of those experiences, or could you tell us about an experience where you saw the materialization of an apport? And again, if you could share with us, is there any reason for it? And the reason why I ask is because, so for example, the night when the crystal was thrown out of the materialized hands, it was Hans, the control for Kai, mentioned that this had healing properties in it, and it was for a particular sitter who was not able to attend. Can you tell us about an experience you've had with apport and what you think the meaning is?
Again, in the meetings or anyone's guess, sometimes they're just simply to show off, almost just to kind of delight people and have fun, and not everyone not take themselves so seriously, but also to show people what the capabilities are. And other times it's very personalized, and an apport will come through as a special object for somebody that's meaningful to them in some kind of a way, and it may not be apparent right off the bat, or it might be later on apparent. Again, like you said, it could be a crystal that supposedly has healing properties. I was at a table, what's called a table tipping seance, where the medium is not in trance, and it was Kai, again, who sat with us. And at the very end, we were all sitting around the table, and we were actually standing up around the table, and we had some red light going, and an apport literally materialized right in front of our eyes. Some of us saw it because we were looking in that direction. I didn't see it. It landed right in front of me on the table with this big thud.
Yes.
And like a huge, and when we looked at it, it was a tiny, tiny, tiny bronze statuette of Ganesh, that Indian god with the elephant's head. And so we were playing with it, experimenting, and saying, how could it make such a huge, loud noise like that? And when we held it up like even 4 feet above the table and dropped it, it would like bounce off the table and bounce all over the place. And this didn't. It just went kaboom and just stayed there like gravity had captured it in some kind of a way.
Right.
And it was meant as a present for the person who had provided the space for the sitting that night, and it had meaning for her.
Right, no. And then, I guess for our listeners, in the table sitting, now I know we talked about the different seance when we all held hands and then the door was sealed. In the table tipping, can you just quickly describe the protocols that are set for that? So, for example, how did you know, for example, that Ganesh wasn't thrown into the room by a Confederate or somebody trying to trick? Because, of course, we do know historically that physical mediumship, unfortunately, has been had some experiences with people not being, being deceptive, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how, for example, what were the controls or protocols that were put in place before that table tipping?
With table tipping, it's, at least in this case, it's much less controlled. Like, people aren't holding hands. It's much less formal, is the only way I can say it.
Right.
And so it doesn't get as intensely dramatic, say, as it did with the ectoplasmic forms and faces coming out. It's more like just playing around with energies. And I suppose it's always possible that someone could have brought in that little statue and somehow managed to wad it through the air directly onto the table, and I don't know how they would not make it bounce.
Right.
But this was in red light, so everyone could see everybody.
Yes.
But then again, and I can't argue with anyone who would want to say, well, magicians know how to do sleight of hand and distract and everything like that. So,
yes, I'm
yeah.
glad. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I looked very carefully at when Kai had the apport come out of his hand, he called the young girl. Do you remember? He called the young lady, said the youngest one in the group.
Right. Yep. The youngest one.
We clearly saw that in red light. His hand was straight out, and the sitter, let's call her R, was able to touch the hand, check his hand. His hand did not move. We all saw it very closely, and out came this apport. And I mean, I know with magicians they move their hand, and it's a sleight of hand. This was no sleight of hand, and I was looking very carefully, and as I said, because it was in red light. So, although I asked you about the, what protocols, just for our listeners, there are things that I know I saw that were very authentic.
Yes.
Very authentic. Now,
right, and you speak to a good point that it's almost purely experiential. Like, you can talk about it and try to even show pictures of it, but until you're actually in the space, you actually start sensing and feeling things that maybe your spiritual senses are picking up that your physical senses don't pick up. So there's a psychological, emotional component going on too that's hard to get across other than direct experience. Absolutely.
There were many sitters that were with me in the seances with David Thompson in Sarasota that were new to the experience and said, once they came out, it almost felt like time changed. The coolness of the room, obviously, the coolness of the room is there to maintain the ectoplasm, but the sense of the change in reality in that room is so very different. And some say that being in the physical seances changes our vibrational frequency. I'm not sure what you think about that.
I've experienced that as true for me. One of the reasons that I went to sit with some very experienced and powerful mediums in France who at one time probably had the best physical mediumship group in the world was I was invited there so that they could start stimulating my physical mediumship abilities with the idea of eventually starting a physical mediumship sitting group back here in the United States. So there's a lot of that goes on, that different mediums go to different circles to have their vibrations raised or affected or evolved in some kind of a way by the environment.
Okay, well, that's really good to know. Now, what I'd like to know, August, where can people get a hold of you? Do you have a particular website or books that you want to tell us about?
My website, people could get in touch with me from there. It's called therisenbooks.com. You can also just Google my name, and it'll probably come up. There aren't too many people with my name, I don't think. And people can also interface with me on Facebook if they just search for my name there. Okay. I just recently went up on Facebook is I'll be traveling to Italy in October. I've been asked to present at the first conference of mediums in Italy on the island of Sardinia, of all places, in October. Wow. So they can see about that on Facebook.
And is that just for mediums, or will there be researchers there, or is it just for people who are practicing mediums?
It's really more of an informational, educational event because there's a lot of psychic/medium stuff that's gone on in Italy for centuries, but it's been very difficult to talk about or explore because of interactions with the religious aspect that goes on there with the church.
For sure.
So we're actually there. There's going to be some of us, including Shannon Taggart, is going to be there doing some demonstrations with Perillian photography and so on. I'm talking about psychological aspects. So we're sort of like you're doing with this show, is just starting to help lay people understand what the possibilities are, and also to help people understand that they can actually find ways to contact and communicate with their loved ones on the other side, that it's not just restricted to professional mediums.
Oh, that's excellent, and I really look forward to following up about that conference. Sounds very exciting, and I hope it will be an annual one. I want to thank you so much, August. Our time has just come to an end, and it's so quick, and for our listeners, we're going to keep building on this. August has laid the great foundation for us with some essentials, but there is so much more that we need to learn about physical mediumship. I'm Donna Smith-Moncrieffe, and we've been talking with August Goforth about the essentials of physical mediumship. I do an up-close look at physical mediumship with two well-known physical mediums known for partial and full-body materializations. If you'd like to know more about how physical mediumship it gives us answers to the nature of the universe, my new book, Medium 9, The Transformational Powers of Spiritual Energy, provides case studies and further details about this topic. Visit our website at www.medium7.com to learn more. If you are interested in seeing David Thompson, an authentic materialization medium, you can browse the conference at www.afterliferesearchandeducation.org, and that's September 25th to 27th in Scottsdale. As we begin to identify the power of consciousness and explore inner power, we will create realities that we all dream about. Join us next week on the Frontiers of a New Science as we find out where the dead go with afterlife author and researcher Mark Ireland. Find out how a grieving father learns that despite the sudden death of his son, he finds through spirit messages from a medium that his son is alive and well in the spirit world. The truth that we don't dive will be explored with this engaging story.
Join us each week as Donna Smith-Moncrieffe explores topics related to spiritual energy and consciousness. Collaborating with other experts, they will share evidence and ideas for you to